Thank you, Stacy. I'm Blake Neffendorf with the City of Buda, and I will be moderating today's panel on water loss. With us today, we have Daniel Rice with the Water Development Board, who will be going over their Level 1 water loss audit validation study. And following up with Daniel will be one of the participants in that from Crystal Clear Special Utility District, Mr. Caton, Germany. Introduce Daniel. Daniel Rice is the team lead and data specialist for the Texas Water Development Board's Municipal Conservation Team. He has worked for the state of Texas for over 10 years with experience in water loss auditing, emergency drinking water technical assistance, and water data. He has a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and a master's degree in geographic information science from Texas State University. And we welcome Daniel up.
Right, thank you, Blake. So I'm here to talk about the water loss audit validation study that we had conducted with contractors, a group of contractors over the course of 2021, looking at our 2020 water loss audit submittals. We do require, the municipal conservation team requires utilities to submit water loss audits to us as part of our data collection at the agency. Speaking of the Texas Water Development Board, we are a state agency, and I should have this memorized, but I'm just going to read our mission statement real quick. It's very short. Our mission is to lead the state's efforts in ensuring a secure water future for Texas and its citizens. And so to accomplish that mission, we do that through water planning, data collection, and dissemination. So whatever data we have, we can get it out to you if you're wanting to look at it. Financial assistance, as many people heard just recently, we are essentially a bank. We do administer those funds, the SRF funds, and many other state funds as well for water and wastewater projects and for flooding as well, as it's been a very important piece that we've noticed recently. And then of course also technical assistance as well. And part of that whole mission, the conservation team and came up with some monies to put together this study. And this study was looking at water loss audits. Is the data that we're collecting, and that's integral to our water planning process as an agency to find that future water source and water loss being a source, is that data accurate? And so we wanted to get an idea of what the industry is looking at as far as validation and whether it would be appropriate for Texas. But before we look at the validation study, it might be pertinent to actually know what validation is. And so this is just a little screen grab of the water loss audit, just a portion of it, a very important piece of it, starting with the water in, the production, and the authorized consumption. So what you sold to your customers, what you used throughout the system, what the water losses were, and where those water losses were occurring. The utility goes in and fills out the volumes within this report. But not only are they filling out these volumes, I have it boxed off in red on the right, we call it an assessment scale. So you're assessing, the utility is self-assessing themselves on how accurate is and what are the procedures and policies and our data collection that goes into the volume that we just reported. So for instance, produced water, how much water did we treat and then put into the system? How confident are we in that number? That's basically what the assessment scale is looking at. And on a scale of 0.5 to 5, they assess themselves using criteria, a table that basically walks them through what score should I choose based on how we're performing. So once they've filled out the report, and these are all self-reported, the next step is to look at the water loss audit and do a validation on it. Now, validation's a big term, but it's actually also within the water loss auditing field, comes from a set standard, a set approach. Just like the water loss audit follows a methodology that is set forth by the industry, validation is set forth by a Water Research Foundation's guidance manual, Level 1 water audit validation over on the left, and then also the principles and programs that go within it. That one in the middle is actually an update that recently was done with the Water Research Foundation. It's a product number 5057 instead of 5639. The update is really an update to the whole guidance manual because AWWA made an update to their water loss audit. So the Water Development Board's water loss audit follows the American Water Works Association's version of the water loss auditing. They're the standard. So just to give you a little background on where this information is coming from, the Water Research Foundation. Looking deeper into that validation, we performed this study using a level 1 validation. There's actually multiple levels of validation. So when a system goes in and fills out their report, that's self-reported. So that's that top one there. They're just filling out the report and assessing based on the best information they have available. Level 1 is looking at those assessment scores, that boxed off in red that we saw earlier, confirming with the utility, did you accurately score yourself? Did you choose the appropriate score? And then asking specific questions, which we'll get into in a bit, of what are your standards and what are your procedures for actually coming up with that score and also that volume within the water loss audit. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are actually correcting data within the report, the water loss audit. We're actually just correcting the assessment score or the data validity score. There's also additional levels of validation though that go a little bit deeper. They are more boots on the ground or digging deeper into the utilities operations, into their billing system, the software, how is the data interconnected to be able to be collected and then reported. So level 2 and level 3, we're not going to get too deep into, but basically just higher levels of order within this validation process. Once you've had level 1 and you're identifying where we might have inefficiencies in our data collection or within our procedures, well, once we've identified those areas, let's go out there and let's start correcting them and seeing what the improvements might be. So with that little bit of background, let's talk about the study itself. So the water loss audit program is always looking to evolve. The industry that we follow, American Water Works Association's free water audit software, we're looking to what they're doing. We're also looking to what our systems that are reporting are showing us. So we're looking at ways to make it a little bit easier for them and also collect the best data that we can for the water planning purposes. And we're always looking for the best management practices that we have available to us to help our customers. We want to see them succeed. We want to see the best data that can help them improve their system operations. And it improves the data, as I've mentioned, which improves water planning. We can find that water and improve from there. So the last piece of why we chose to do this study was, well, we found some money. We actually had money and we were wondering, how are we actually going to use this money? And looking at what other states have been doing in water loss, that map over on the bottom right, coming from that Water Research Foundation report, shows some of the states that are actually implementing or requiring level 1 validation as part of the audit submission process in their states. And then also looking at the AWWA free water audit software. This is the most recent version 6. There were some big changes to it, and the approach to assessing and validating was greatly improved within this. So looking at those, we were looking to improve upon ourselves as well and see what the impact would be in Texas. So we went with a couple of contractors and asked them to identify 10 utilities. Some utilities less than 10,000, some between 10 and 50, and some between 50 and 100,000 population. Have a good geographic representation, which is really difficult within those 3 groups, 10 utilities across the giant state of Texas, but I think we did an excellent job of coming up with those systems. We asked them to draft us some validation questions that follows that Water Research Foundation guidance manual. We wanted to make sure those utilities had historic water loss data. We wanted to see the difference between what they reported for this year with validation versus what their data was prior. We asked that they perform a webinar. Of course, during COVID, we did a This was during 2021, so we did webinars to explain what this whole process was to these utilities, what the benefit might be, and what they should expect going through the validation. Then they had the one-on-one validation meetings with the contractors. Each of the utilities put together their team of water loss experts and had that sit-down meeting with them one-on-one and went through those validation questions. And then the final piece we asked for is we want to see a validation report that you give to the utility with recommendations. We want this to be beneficial for them as well. It's not just to see, is it useful for us to go forward with validation in the state? We wanted to actually benefit these utilities that are participating. A little icing on top as part of this whole study was that the contractors actually did a little bit more than just level 1 validation for a couple of systems. One utility actually with the billing data analysis was performed, and those charts on the bottom are showing that there was a data anomaly in the billing data reported in the month of October, that there was some volumes that were being double counted, and so that was being reported to us. And doing this billing data analysis, they were able to dig in and see, well, yeah, that's a double count, and then the data was changed for what was reported. 2 utilities had a real loss component analysis done. Just real quick, that's looking at the actual, where is this leakage happening? Is it happening on storage tanks? What are you doing as far as leakage control throughout your system? And here are some recommendations. So they're digging a little bit deeper into the process of looking for those leaks, what the utilities are doing to look for those leaks. And so getting back to, and just to give you a little bit of background on what happened during those one-on-one validation meetings. Might be a little hard to read, but this is just a snippet of what those questions are. So for produced water, line 13 on our water loss audit, one of the most important pieces of the water loss audit, how much water are you putting into your system? You can't use or lose that water if you're not reporting it correctly. It's asking the validators going in and asking the auditor, the system, these questions, and a couple of questions beyond them as well, just based on their experience and what the conversation leads to. And through these questions, they determine what score did you provide for yourself, and then over on the right, where can we fit what you've discussed with us? Where do you actually fit within that assessment? You said that you were a 4 out of 5 on your assessment scale. From our conversation, you appear to be a 3. Actually. So that score would be corrected through this level 1 validation process. But not only that, we've also asked them all these questions about how they actually perform and collect the data that they're reporting. So if they're reporting it, if they have better data available, then we take that better data and put that into the water loss audit. So that's part of this validation process as well, correcting the data and the scores. That one piece that's real important is providing that level 1 validation report after we've had those one-on-ones with the system. Here's what we found. Here's what we discussed. This is a piece of paper that you can actually look at what we discussed. What are our recommendations? It's not just this one sheet. It's a big packet that we provide to them to say, where were you before we had this validation, and where were you after this validation? And then they can take that information and move on to level 2 validation or level 3 using this level 1 information. And of course, we wanted to see what the impact was and if it would be beneficial to move forward with a more expanded program for water loss validation in Texas. And so we were provided the final study back in December. And it should be available on our webpage sometime soon. So keep an eye out for that. It goes into greater detail, but I'm going to jump into some key points that we came across throughout this study that are listed out within that report. So this is a look at pre and post, before and after level 1 validation was performed for the 10 utilities. And we're looking at some key performance indicators within the water loss audit. We have apparent losses per connection per day, real loss per connection per day, the infrastructure leakage index, and then we're also have the data validity or that assessment score. And for apparent losses and real losses, if there was a change pre to post, that indicated that there was actually a change in the volume of water loss in the system. Level 1 validation doesn't technically change those volumes, but it is important to note that through this process, we can see a change in the volume of water losses because of those discussions that we had and those questions that we asked. A majority of these systems, I think it's about 8 out of 10, actually had a decrease in their assessment score. So basically, they were over-assessing themselves. They were saying they were more confident in how they collected the data than what the validation actually came out with. And we also had some decreases and some increases in water losses as well. This might be a lot to take in, but this is just showing that not only did the assessment score change, but the water audit entry, or that volume or value, did change. So on the bottom is listed out different fields within the water loss audit that were discussed through this process. And in the blue, or on the left of each of those, is the volume or value for that field, or is the count of a change in the volume or value. So for utilities linked to main lines, two systems had a change in the value for main lines. They weren't reporting it correctly, and they had better information. 3 of those, the 10 systems, had a change in the assessment score for it. They weren't assessing themselves properly. So going across, we saw a huge number actually in the authorized consumption for billed meter. We saw 8 out of 10 had a change in their assessment scale score. And then same for the unauthorized consumption and systematic data handling discrepancy. So quite a few fields that were inappropriate or inefficiently filled out initially. So this level 1 validation study shows that we had an improvement in the data that was being reported. Just a little closer look at some of the performance indicators from level 1. So these are the count of changes pre and post. So not only is the assessment scale score changing, those volumes and values throughout the report are also changing through this process, which is key. We're collecting better data. And just a little deeper dive into the apparent and real losses. These are key performance indicators to track water loss from year to year at a utility. And we're seeing a change pre to post. So the validation was improving these key performance indicators, which is key because if you're assessing or tracking yourself year to year, but you're not providing the best data, and validation could provide you better data, well, the better data it's easier to track. It's more beneficial to you to actually have that better data. So the validation has provided that for us. Now a little closer look at the assessment scores and the changes pre and post. So we're falling somewhere between 50 and 80. And a majority of these systems, as I mentioned before, have seen a decrease in the score. They were over assessing themselves. And then just to look at some of those utility recommendations. What were we telling the utilities and recommending after these validation reports were created? And a lot of it was, we're looking at production meters. They're not being tested or calibrated necessarily to the best management practices. Customer meters, they could do better at sample testing and testing large meters for usage. And then there's a lag time correction issue. So when you actually are collecting the billed volumes, when you're reading those meters versus when you're reading the supply meters, they're not on the same date. So there's a lag time correction issue there. And then retail cost and production cost, because we're looking at how much water loss costs as well, is not exactly up to standard as well. So that total assessment score, 50 to 80, it suggests that there are some next steps that these utilities could take, because we're not hitting that 100 score on the assessment, the total assessment, which is the highest score they could get. So it suggests these next steps, and these are some of those recommendations that we found throughout this process. So we wanted to see how validation can impact and would be beneficial for Texas and moving forward with an expanded program. So some of the findings that the contractors looked at was that there was an improved reliability of self-reported water loss audit results. So we saw that prior. We had better data that was being collected. after the validation meetings. Not only that, but the utilities are learning better data management approaches or practices. So it's not just that particular 2020 water loss audit, but it's all the future water loss audits that are filled out. They're learning these practices, these best management approaches. Some of the supporting data is already being tracked, so it's not necessarily too much of a heavy lift to go through this validation process for these utilities. They're already submitting this stuff to us. They're already collecting a lot of the data, the billing data, the production volumes, so forth. And then the last one there was, there is staff time availability that's adequate to participate in level 1 validation. If you go back and look at, I didn't mention it, but one of those data points showed NA for a system and for the pre-validation. And that was because they didn't provide us a water loss audit before we were able to do a validation meeting. And that was because it was 2021 and because of Winter Storm Uri, very small system, one person wearing many hats. They had other things to worry about besides doing this validation. But they were still able to meet with us and get that level 1 validation done. So not maybe on the right time scale, but they were able to participate. So it wasn't too much of a heavy or big ask of them to participate. So they also provided us with some recommendations if we were to expand our program. So this is looking at the 16 regional water planning groups, and their recommendation is to expand this study and start with one region and expand from there. So just kind of giving you a little visual there. And then the next recommendation is to require it for all annually required water loss audits. So we require about 750 water loss audits or utilities to submit water loss audits every year. And so that was the recommendation. The green indicates those that are annually required. So it's a good geographic representation as well throughout Texas. And then the final recommendation is to better align our current water loss audit with the free water audit software version 6. And then some next steps. The Water Development Board is going to continue to evolve with the industry, look for the best approach for water loss auditing. We're looking at expanding our water loss program, regardless of those recommendations, whatever it might be, but we're looking to expand our water loss program as resources dictate. Currently, there's only one water loss audit person that works for the board. And then we're going to continue to further stress the importance of data validation. We're including it in our trainings currently and discussing it with utilities frequently. And then we're going to continue to work closely with regional water planning groups and our financial teams to incorporate water loss projects and validation as a key piece to that. And so with that, here's contact and the study contractors included in the report. Thank you.